Every Tuesday, 72-year-old Esther, known as Mama Esther, drags her aching hip and a folding table to the corner of 145th and Plymouth, right outside St. James Baptist Church. Her hands carry homemade pies, apple, pumpkin, peach, crafted with love, no preservatives, just cinnamon and prayers. She's not selling, she's serving. No banners, no hashtags, just a paper cup of tea and a quiet truth: you're breathing, so you've got purpose. She feeds anyone who stops by with a smile. Today was no different. Under the morning sun, Mama Esther set up her table, pies arranged like offerings. Jarvis, a Vietnam vet with missing fingers but an unbroken spirit, shuffled over. "Mama, you're saving my life again," he said, his half-smile warm with gratitude. Esther poured in tea, and they shared a laugh, the kind that holds a community together. But peace is fragile on this block. A patrol car rolled up like a storm cloud. Two cops stepped out. One young, eager to flex his power, the other older, eyes hollow from years of calling cruelty procedure. "What's this?" "Selling food without a permit," the young one barked, as if Esther's pies were contraband. Her voice stayed steady, decades of resilience in every word. "This isn't for sale. It's service." Pastor Hughes approved it, Councilman Mendez too. She reached for her purse, slow as molasses, to show proof. But to the young cop, a grandmother moving in broad daylight was a threat. His hand gripped her shoulder, hard. The next moment, everything changed. Mama Esther's world tilted as the young cop's grip tightened. Her shoulder burned under his force, but she kept her calm, the kind forged in years of facing worse than this. "I'm just getting my papers," she said, voice steady as a hymn. But the officer wasn't listening. To him, her slow reach for her purse was defiance, her age a challenge to his authority. In a heartbeat, he yanked her arm, twisting her frail frame. The crowd gasped as she stumbled, then fell hard. Her knees cracked against the sidewalk, a sound that cut through the morning air like a gunshot. Pies scattered, apple, pumpkin, peach smashed into the concrete like broken dreams. Her cheek pressed against the gritty pavement, warm tea spilling from the cup in her hand, scalding her thin skin. Pain shot through her palms, her hips screaming from the impact. The young cop knelt on her back, his weight crushing her breath. "Stop resisting," he barked, as if a 72-year-old grandmother could fight back. Esther's lips trembled, tasting blood, but her spirit held firm. "I'm not resisting," she whispered, voice barely audible. Jarvis, the Vietnam vet, stood frozen, his missing fingers curled into a fist. "It's a pie table, not a drug bust, you fool," he muttered, eyes wide with disbelief. The crowd stirred, phones out, recording, voices rising. "That's Mama Esther," a woman shouted. "She feeds the shelter." Another yelled, her husband was a cop. Esther lifted a trembling hand, signaling for calm. "St. James." Yes, they did it again. No tears, no pleas, just facts, delivered with the strength of a woman who'd buried a husband and raised a warrior. The crowd grew louder, their phones capturing every second. "She's 7'2", someone shouted. "She gives us food." Jarvis, his war-scarred face tight with anger, stood close, muttering, "This ain't right." The older cop, silent till now, shifted uneasily, sensing the tide turning. The young one, oblivious, tightened his grip, spitting, "You have the right to remain silent." Esther's eyes narrowed. "I'm a grandmother, not a criminal," she said, her voice cutting through his bravado. On the other end of the call, her son listened. No words wasted, just a mother's voice and a son's understanding. He was already moving. Esther hung up, her hand steady despite the pain radiating from her hip. The air felt heavier now, charged with something unspoken. The crowd's murmurs grew quiet, as if they sensed what was coming. 5 minutes, she thought. Just 5 minutes. The young cop smirked, unaware of the storm approaching. Jarvis caught Esther's eye, nodding slightly. She didn't cry. She waited. And in that wait, the block held its breath, knowing justice was on its way. 5 minutes felt like forever, but the air shifted when a black SUV screeched to a stop, no plates, no hesitation. The crowd parted as Mama Esther's son stepped out. Civilian clothes, jeans, black jacket. But his walk screamed military precision, shoulders broad, carrying the weight of every wrong this block had seen. His eyes locked on his mother, still pinned to the sidewalk, pies ruined, tea staining the concrete. The young cop's knee was still on her back, his arrogance blinding him to the change in the atmosphere. The older cop, though, took a step back, sensing trouble. "Mama," her son said, kneeling beside her, his voice low but laced with fury. "They touch your face?" Esther nodded, a small gesture, her cheek scraped raw. He stood, slow and deliberate, his gaze cutting through the officers like a blade. The crowd went silent, phones still rolling, capturing the moment. Jarvis whispered, "That's her boy." Everyone knew who he was, Delta Force, active operator, a man who'd faced wars most couldn't imagine. "Which one of you did it?" he asked, voice calm but cold, the kind that makes men rethink their choices. The young cop, Officer Crow, scoffed, "Who are you?" Her son didn't flinch. He pulled a badge, not police, military, high tier. The lettering gleamed, Delta Force. The crowd murmured, some cheering softly. "Officers Crow and Mathis, Unit 211, he said, naming them like he'd memorized their souls. "You're under arrest. Title 18, Sections 242 and 245, assault on an elder, violation under color of law." The older cop, Mathis, froze. Crow's smirk faded. The block held its breath, waiting for what came next. Mama Esther's son stood tall, his Delta Force badge glinting in the sunlight, a silent warning. The crowd's murmurs faded into a hush, every eye locked on him. Officer Crow, the young cop, tried to laugh it off, his voice shaky. "You don't have jurisdiction," he blurted, but the words sounded hollow, like a child defying a storm. The older cop, Mathis, stayed silent, his face pale, knowing they'd crossed a line no badge could protect. Esther, still on the ground, her cheeks scraped and palms burning, watched her son with quiet pride. "I have orders, evidence, and witnesses," her son said, his voice steady as steel. "Test me if you want." He stepped forward, pulling the young cop's own handcuffs from his belt. Click. The cuffs snapped onto Crow's wrists before he could blink. The crowd erupted cheers, claps, phones raised higher, capturing every second. Mathis didn't resist as the second pair of cuffs clicked shut. Title 18, assault on an elder, her son repeated, each word a hammer strike. "You touched my mother." Jarvis, the Vietnam vet, let out a low whistle. "That's justice," he muttered, his eyes shining with something like hope. The crowd chanted, "Mama Esther." Mama Esther, as phones kept recording, videos already spreading across the block. Esther's son didn't flinch, didn't pose. He knelt again, checking her bruised hands, his touch gentle but his eyes fierce. "You okay, Mama?" he asked. She nodded, lips tight, refusing to let pain win. The ambulance siren wailed in the distance, closing in. The block, once loud with chaos, now buzzed with awe. Two cops, cuffed by their own tools, faced a truth they couldn't outrun. The ambulance screeched to a halt, red lights flashing across the tense crowded 145th and Plymouth. Mama Esther lay on the sidewalk, her breathing shallow but steady, her bruised hands clutching the edge of her torn apron. The pain in her hip flared with every heartbeat, yet her eyes stayed fixed on her son, the Delta Force operator, standing like a shield between her and the cuffed officers. The crowd's cheers softened, replaced by a murmur of relief as paramedics rushed forward, their hands gentle, unlike the cop's earlier grip. "Ma'am, we've got you," a young paramedic said, kneeling beside Esther. They lifted her onto a stretcher, careful not to jostle her battered frame. Her cheek, scraped raw, stung as the cool air hit it, but she didn't wince. She'd faced worse in 72 years, this was just another scar. Her son stayed close, his hand brushing hers, a silent promise, "You're not alone." The crowd parted, phones still recording, some whispering prayers, others shouting, "Take care of Mama Esther." Jarvis, the Vietnam vet, stood nearby, his weathered face tight with emotion. "She's tougher than all of us," he said to an onlooker, his voice thick. The cuffed cops, Crow and Mathis, stood under the weight of their own handcuffs, heads low as the crowd's eyes burned into them. Esther's son didn't glance their way, his focus was his mother, her dignity intact despite the concrete's bite. As the paramedics secured her, Esther caught a glimpse of her scattered pies, their sweet filling smeared across the pavement. "Save some for Jarvis," she whispered, her voice faint but firm. The paramedic nodded, tears in her eyes. The stretcher rolled, and the block watched in reverence. As the ambulance doors closed around Mama Esther, the crowd at 145th and Plymouth grew louder, their voices a mix of anger and triumph. Phones stayed raised, capturing every angle of the scene. Officers Crow and Mathis, cuffed, standing in the shadow of Esther's son, the Delta Force operator. His presence was a quiet storm, his badge a symbol of authority no one dared challenge. The crowd's chants of Mama Esther's echoed, a testament to her place in their hearts. She wasn't just a grandmother, she was their anchor, feeding souls as much as bodies. A woman in the crowd, clutching a toddler, shouted, "She gave my kids food when we had nothing." Another voice, older, cracked with emotion, "Her husband served this city." The stories poured out, each one a thread in the tapestry of Esther's life. Jarvis, the Vietnam vet, stood tall despite his missing fingers, his eyes locked on the cops. "You messed with the wrong family," he said, loud enough for others to nod. Esther's son didn't acknowledge the cheers. His focus was razor-sharp, ensuring the officers stayed put until backup arrived. The young cop, Crow, shifted nervously, his earlier bravado gone. Mathis, the older one, stared at the ground, as if it could swallow his shame. The crowd's phones kept rolling, videos already spreading online, hashtags like #JusticeForMamaEsther forming in real time. A teenager nearby uploaded the clip, captioning it, "They tried to break her, but her son's unbreakable." The ambulance pulled away, siren fading, carrying Esther to safety. Her son turned, scanning the crowd, his gaze steady. They saw it then, a promise of justice, not loud, but deep. The block buzzed with a new energy, united by one woman's strength. The crowded 145th and Plymouth stood united, their phones still recording as Mama Esther's ambulance vanished down the street. Her son, the Delta Force operator, remained, a towering figure of quiet fury. Officers Crow and Mathis, cuffed with their own handcuffs, stood exposed under the weight of dozens of eyes. The young cop, Crow, muttered something under his breath, but one look from Esther's son silenced him. Mathis, the older officer, kept his head down, as if the pavement could hide his guilt. The air crackled with tension, every onlooker waiting for what came next. Esther's son didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You thought she was alone," he said, his words slicing through the silence. "You thought no one would come for her." The crowd murmured agreement, some clapping, others shouting, "Tell em." Jarvis, the Vietnam vet, stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "She's fed this block for years. You don't touch Mama Esther." His words carried the weight of a man who'd seen too much but never lost his fight. A police siren wailed in the distance, backup for the cuffed officers, no doubt. But Esther's son stood unmoved, his military training evident in every controlled movement. He pulled out his phone, speaking briefly, his words clipped and precise. "Unit 211, detained. Send federal oversight." The crowd buzzed. Federal? This wasn't just a local matter anymore. The teenager filming grinned, his live stream blowing up with comments, "Delta Force don't play." Esther's son glanced at the crowd, nodding once, a silent thank you. They weren't just witnesses, they were family. The block held its ground, united, as the truth of Mama Esther's strength rippled far beyond the sidewalk. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the charged air at 145th and Plymouth. Two federal vehicles pulled up, their doors marked with seals that made the crowd whisper. Esther's son, the Delta Force operator, stood unwavering, his eyes locked on officers Crow and Mathis, still cuffed and silent. The young cop's defiance had crumbled, his face pale as federal agents stepped out, badges gleaming. Mathis, the older officer, looked like a man who'd seen his career end in a single moment. The crowd's phones kept rolling, capturing every second of this reckoning. A federal agent, stern-faced, approached Esther's son. "You called it in?" he asked, voice respectful. Her son nodded, handing over his military ID. Title 18, Sections 242 and 245. Assault on an elder, violation under color of law. The agent glanced at the cuffed cops, then at the crowd, their video's undeniable evidence. "We'll take it from here," he said, signaling his team to secure the officers. The crowd erupted in cheers, some chanting, "Justice for Mama Esther." Jarvis, the Vietnam vet, wiped his eyes, muttering, "She always said help was coming." A woman nearby hugged her friend, whispering, "Her son's a hero." The teenager's live stream surged, comments flooding, "This is what accountability looks like." Esther's son didn't bask in the praise. He turned to the crowd, raising a hand for silence. "This isn't about me," he said, voice steady. "It's about her. Keep her name alive." As the federal agents led the officers away, the block felt lighter, like a weight had lifted. Mama Esther's pies were gone, but her spirit remained unbreakable. The crowd stood taller, their unity a testament to one woman's quiet power. As the federal vehicles drove off with Officers Crow and Mathis, the crowded 145th and Plymouth stood in a reverent hush. Mama Esther's son, the Delta Force operator, remained, his broad shoulders a silent pillar for the community. The sidewalk, stained with spilled tea and crushed pies, told a story of cruelty met with courage. Phones slowly lowered, but the videos were already viral, spreading Mama Esther's name across the city and beyond. Hashtags like #JusticeForMamaEsther trended, each post a spark in a growing fire. Jarvis, the Vietnam vet, approached Esther's son, his voice thick. "She's the heart of this block," he said, clutching a crumpled paper cup. "Always will be." The son nodded, his eyes scanning the faces around him, elders, mothers, kids, all bound by Esther's love. "She taught me to stand," he said simply. "Now we stand for her." The crowd murmured agreement, some wiping tears, others planning to rebuild her table. At the hospital, Esther rested, her bruises tended but her spirit untouched. Word reached her of the videos, the chants, the arrests. She smiled faintly, whispering, "My boy did good." The block was already organizing donations for new pies, a petition for a community award in her name. The teenager's livestream hit millions, comments flooding, "Mama Esther is all of us." Her son stepped back as the crowd began to disperse, some staying to clean the scattered pies. He looked at the church, its steeple high against the sky, and felt his mother's strength in his bones. This wasn't the end, it was a beginning. Mama Esther's legacy, forged in cinnamon and prayers, would outlive the concrete that tried to break her. The block would never forget.